Hello, my name is Paolo Karat and I'm the Chief Executive of Online Mentor. This is a brief introduction and overview on the role of reflection in your training contract records. Because you'll remember that the SRA does require you to be reflective. You need to be reflecting from time to time on your performance, and you need to be reflecting from time to time on your plans for development. In other words, your ideas, thoughts for how you can continue to develop your skills as a lawyer. And we are talking here about sort of skills and competencies and judgment rather than how much legal knowledge you're hoovering up. But what does this actually mean in practice? What does this look like? Well, let's work through a practical example with you which hopefully will shed some light into it. And in this example, which I've actually taken from my own experience as a first seat trainee, I was asked by my supervisor in commercial litigation to do some research into the Brussels Convention, and that's to do with governing law and jurisdiction, choice of forum, where contracts are entered into, where you can sue, this kind of stuff. And it is actually very technical. It's not particularly easy, especially not for a first seat trainee, as I discovered. And as part of that job, I processed loads of cases. I had to go back to my supervisor and client repeatedly to check on certain facts before producing a research note and memo of advice. So what? Well, it could be that the so what is, well, look, this is an example of work that I'm doing, so for that reason alone I'm putting it in my training contract record, and that's fine, because not every single one of your training record entries has to be reflective. If it's representative of what you've been doing but you don't think you've learned something out of it, then by all means put it in. But actually I learned a big lesson from this particular piece of experience, and the context was that in essence I got myself into a bit of a tangle with the law and the facts, and the mistake that I made was that I didn't go back to my supervisor and my client as often as I should have to clarify some quite important bits of the factual matrix. I got to a point where I'd put loads of time on the clock, I'd gone back to them multiple times, and I made an error of judgment. I just thought, well, I've done enough and I'll produce my advice and we'll see where we are. So the so what was actually really, really important to nail down facts fully and to go back repeatedly and as often as necessary to supervisor and client before going firm with my advice, because you guessed it, I got it wrong basically, and I was pulled up by my supervisor. So what might this actually look like in terms of what you might put in to that reflections learning points piece? Well, again, simply the learning point was these cases turn on their very precise factual framework, critical to go back and consult multiple times until I felt I had fully nailed the facts before committing to any advice. So there we are. And if we think about this in terms of what that tells us reflection looks like, it's, if nothing else, it's about the process of stepping back from your experience to identify what you've learned from it, and also not just identify but articulate it, because it's not obvious necessarily to the person reading the training record entry that you did learn what you learned simply by saying what you did, because we see that quite a lot from trainees. They'll tell us what they did and it will be left to inference as to what it is that you learned. It often also involves how you might do things better or differently next time. And the sorts of questions that flush out these learning points are, the so what question. So what? What did I learn? What is the key takeaway from this experience? What went well and why? Or if you're taking an example of where it didn't go so well, what didn't go so well and why? And would I do anything differently next time? Now, in the example that I gave, there are answers to each of those questions that I was able to give from the example that I had. And what you'll notice is that whilst I'm not saying that reflections only occur from where you've had difficult experiences, it is certainly true to say that we often learn the most by reflecting on those difficult and challenging experiences. And certainly my advice to you would be not to be shy about including in your training record examples about examples where perhaps your performance wasn't 100% fantastic, because actually you can handle it in a very appropriate way and identify the key learning points, and your supervisor, it seems to me, will think very, very positively of you as being somebody who's very honest and very committed to improve their performance. Okay, so that will do for now, but any queries in relation to this, then by all means get in touch.